2021 marked a massive moment for Formula One. For the first time in the sport's history, we saw a large-scale introduction of financial regulations like we've never seen before. Now, originally, there were two types of regulations. There were the technical regulations and the sporting regulations. The technical regulations concerned anything to do with car design, whereas the sporting regulations monitored how the races were stewarded. But this is the first time we've seen financial regulations hold any real importance. There were a few in the past, but they turned out to be complete failures. So will the cost cap be different this time round? Well, since its introduction at the start of the 2021 season, it's certainly been a topic of discussion. Last season it was all about who should pay for crashes, and this season it's all about how to respond to rising inflation. So in this video, let's have a bit of a gander and see if the cost cap is actually working, or if there's any hope that it will continue to work or not work in the years to come. So what actually is the cost cap? Well, for those that aren't aware, it's a maximum amount of money that teams can spend every year on things related to car performance. But I'll get into what's included and excluded a bit later on in this video. But there are two main reasons why Formula One have introduced a cost cap. The main one being to level the playing field between the teams. You see, the richest teams in history have always been competitive because they've had the latest technology and the best facilities. Basically, more money means more resources to build a quick car. And this is why we've seen smaller teams fail more often than not in Formula One, and most of the time end up in bankruptcy. So introducing a cost cap means the big three teams of Mercedes, Ferrari and Red Bull can no longer spend their unlimited money to solve their problems and actually have to be more efficient. And this overall reduces the spending gap between the bigger and smaller teams. And the second reason for a cost cap was to attract more teams to the sport. Realistically, any team would jump at the opportunity to race in Formula One, and now with a cost cap they can actually afford to due to the lower operating costs. And it also gives the teams an element of predictability with their spending, which was one of the main reasons teams didn't join in the past. But it doesn't just give them enough financial security to survive in F1, it also allows them to be competitive. You see, in the past it would take years to develop enough financial resources to actually build a good car. Whereas now with the cost cap, you can perform at a high level in much less time, especially if you find a cheeky loophole in the regulations. So that is why we have a cost cap, but how is it broken down financially? You see, when it was originally conceived, the figure was $175 million. But then COVID happened and that put massive financial strain on the teams. So they lowered this figure to $145 million for the 2021 season in the hope that large car manufacturers would still stay in the sport. But the figure didn't stay at $145 million. What Formula One decided to do was gradually lower this from $145 million in 2021 to $140 million in 2022 and down to $135 million in 2023 and onwards. And the reason Formula One did this was to allow the teams a bit more time to scale down their operations and redeploy staff onto other projects. And to put a bit of context behind all these numbers, the average spend for a Formula One team is roughly £250 to £300 million every year, so the budget cap is roughly half of this. Right, I mentioned earlier that the cost cap covers everything to do with car performance, and Formula One deem this as being the car design and development, component manufacturing, testing and race operations, and the majority of employee salaries. However, there are also a lot of exclusions. Marketing costs, driver salaries, engine development, customer engine payments, salaries of the three highest paid personnel, salary costs for maternity, paternity or sick leave, costs of medical benefits and social security for staff, corporate income tax, non-F1 activities, plant and machinery lease, maintenance cost and bills, property costs, employee bonuses, the fee to enter the championship every season, super license purchases, travel costs for staff, development of alternative fuels, depreciation costs on assets, employee termination costs, finance costs, legal costs, human resources, and my favourite of all, penalty costs incurred for breaching the cost cap. So just to put this in context, all of these excluded areas take up about 55% of a total team's budget based on 2019 figures. So it's fair to say that the cost cap is by no means covering everything that the teams are spending. Now, it's also important to note here that the cost from crashes is included in the cost cap, which I'm sure you've seen has caused a lot of controversy. So that's basically the cost cap in its entirety, but it's a useless exercise unless it's policed or regulated. And so the cost cap administration was brought in to monitor how the teams comply with the rules. And so obviously if a team doesn't comply, they will get punished. Now the punishment is dependent on how severe their slip up was, but what F1 have done is sort the cap breaches into three main categories. Firstly, there's procedural breaches, which involves things like delivering the team's accounts after a certain deadline of March the 31st. Williams in fact have already been fined $25,000 for this exact reason. Then there are the minor overspend breaches, which is when a team exceeds the cost cap by less than 5%, and material overspend breaches where a team exceeds the cost cap by more than 5%. Pretty simple. But the way these breaches are penalised is not so black and white. For a procedural breach, you get fined, but the fine is determined case by case, so there isn't an exact figure you get fined each time. Then for a minor overspend breach, you get a minor sporting penalty in the form of a reprimand, deduction of points, race bans, limits on testing, and even a reduction in that team's individual cost cap. But to be fair, the final penalty for a material overspend breach is pretty simple. You get disqualified from the whole championship. Now, you might be thinking this is stupid. The teams have no idea how badly they'll be punished. But this is actually a very good thing. Having the rules a bit more ambiguous means the teams will be more scared to push the boundaries of the regulations, allowing the cost cap to actually do its job. So with all this being said, is the cost cap actually working? Well, upon doing my research, I found I was asking myself quite a lot if the cap would actually be effective. And this is for two main reasons. The first one being the massive list of exemptions, and the second one being how easy it is for teams to find loopholes. Right, well firstly, some of the exemptions listed in the 36-page financial regulations are ridiculously ambiguous. When I was looking through at what the teams could spend money on, some of them are listed down as things such as all property costs or all finance costs. And all this is going to do is create grey areas for the teams to exploit. Now, I touched on this a bit earlier, but the race calculated how much teams spent in 2019 ignoring those exemptions, and this is how it's broken down. These are the total team budgets for 2019, so basically how much they spent overall. And these are the team budgets excluding those exemptions, so basically the amount that the cost cap actually has an effect on. So in reality, the cap has a much lower effect than we have first expected. Instead, what I think would have made more sense is to introduce a much higher cap that covers all expenses, rather than have a lower one that only covers half. But that's not the worst of it. Some of the exemptions listed are so ridiculous it's actually funny. For example, when it comes to employee salary bonuses, you're allowed to pay your employees 20% of their salary as a bonus, or a maximum amount of $10 million. Now, this isn't just stupid, this is dangerous. Look at it this way. F1 have included everything related to car performance in the budget cap, including the majority of employee salaries. If the big teams can simply pay their employees massive bonuses instead, then it's completely useless. As Matteo Binotto said recently, if the teams are restricted in spending in one area, then they'll just increase spending in another. And there are so many ways they can do this. Increase spending in marketing to find the best technical partners, pay unlimited amounts for the best drivers and executives, invest massive amounts of money in infrastructure, etc, etc. And some of the teams have already been thinking about many ways to get around the cap, and some of them are very creative. For example, let's say you're Red Bull and you're operating to the limit of the cap. But AlphaTauri, the Red Bull B team, is operating below the limit. Well, there's nothing to say you can't ask them as Red Bull to carry out projects for the development of certain technical things. Or as a team, you can pay your team principal a much larger salary, ask him to set up an independent company that can carry out technical tasks that aren't necessarily related to Formula 1. Long story short, teams are finding so many ways to still outspend their competitors. Obviously a lot less than before the cap, but the prevalence of money still remains. Now, I know I sound extremely negative about this, and that is for a reason. I think there could be much more about the budget cap to make it actually work better. But I'm sure as time progresses, it will change and adapt to make it a bit more effective. And we've already seen this happen. Due to the Ukraine war as well as some other external factors, inflation around the world is rising a lot more than usual, in some places up to 6%. And the F1 teams have come out saying they simply can't keep up. So what F1 agreed with the teams to do was increase the budget for this year by 3.1%. So instead of it being $140 million, it's now $144.3 million. Now, this is just one example of Formula One adapting the regulations in some way. And after all, these financial regulations are the first of their kind, so I'm sure as time progresses, they will change and they will adapt whenever issues are found. Much like the technical regulations are always changing as well. And what's great to hear is Williams team principal Jos Capito has come out saying the teams are being very transparent with Formula One whenever they find a new loophole, which is exactly what we want to hear. So there is no denying that the cost cap is a massive step in the right direction despite its shortfalls. And I've said many times, the more money you have, the more success you have. So with Formula One trying to create a more equal field, it's about time we got some financial regulations in place. And don't get me wrong, there are massive benefits to the cost cap in its current form, such as if a smaller team found a loophole in the technical regulations and found some good speed, it would take the larger teams much longer to catch up. And well, as these grey areas get stamped down, I'm sure we're going to start to see the cost cap having much more of an effect as the years go by. Now, I'd be quite interested to know where you guys stand on the cost cap, because it is one of those conflicting things, so let me know in the comments section what you think. And as always, make sure to like, subscribe and smash that notification bell to be reminded of any new videos.